What would you two, I'd be interested in your perspective on using a tax system to incent or disincent behavior. And I think obviously the tobacco tax is probably the most broadly used there. Is that an appropriate use of the tax system to try to change individuals' personal behaviors? Mark, you want to?
No. I mean, all taxes distort to some extent, you know, behaviors, but clearly you want to try to get a tax system that minimizes that as much as possible.
What do you I mean, tobacco tax is something that's gone through the legislature a couple times, and even the governor was willing to do a tobacco fee a couple years ago. So, right, fee. So, what do you think of that?
Well, I agree with Mark, although we all in the legislature do it because we're making choices, and there's all kinds of preferences built in now. So some will argue when you take a preference away, then you've tried to do some social engineering just by taking it away. But yes, I think we're kind of singing the same song here: broad-based, low rate, and then let the market work, and don't try to get people to do different things. The cigarette tax, I do think for some folks absolutely was a tax to try to get people to quit smoking, or I guess in a more targeted way, it was the research was to not start. So that's a great example of you're trying to tax. You know, I mean, in general, the theory is that you tax something, you'll get less of it. That's the theory. But I think the thing with the cigarette tax is it also had this side benefit. Not only was it politically popular because most people don't do it, so you know you can look at your constituents and figure out pretty quickly, hey, most of you don't pay this tax, so it's an easy political vote. But the other thing that's going on in the cigarette tax is there is a legitimate argument that different things and people are choosing to use them are costing the system a lot of money that everyone else is paying. So cigarette smokers cost all of us in our health care insurance premiums money. And so it was an attempt to recoup some of that cost to society. And there are other things like that. Alcohol is another one that tax hasn't been raised in 25 years, and there are huge costs to the Minnesota state government system as a result of that being a legal drug in our society that most people don't have a problem with, but some people get in huge trouble with. And we all sort of subsidize that. The idea there would again be another sort of, you know, trying to get a certain behavior. But yes, in general, we want to try to stay away from engineering. I think what's really interesting in the whole jobs debate that's going on right now is both sides of the aisle have all these ideas, and they're all kind of engineering. They're picking markets, they're picking different kinds of industries and say, give them a tax credit, give them this, give them this incentive, let's fight the war with the other states. And these are all the same sort of behaviors, and then they increase state spending. So it's really easy to see why people in both parties start out pure and kind of get into their agenda pretty quickly, and we're all guilty of it because we all have things we're trying to achieve at the legislature.
Let's talk a little bit about the personal income tax. So we're hearing a lot, Representative Benson mentioned it, a lot of volatility in our revenues. Yesterday there was a commission a meeting at the legislature that talked about the state potentially having to borrow money for its cash flow, there's some real potential shortfalls. Obviously, we know we're going to likely have a big deficit come at us yet again. So let's talk about the personal income tax. You know, how volatile is that? As volatile as folks say that it is? How do we move away from that? How do the aging demographics impact that? So if we could just maybe, Mark, if you want to start with some of your thoughts on the personal income tax.
Well, it's the cornerstone of the state revenue system, and the issue that typically is talked about with respect to the individual income tax is the degree of progressivity in the structure. Minnesota, by our own calculations, has one of the most progressive income tax systems in the nation. We place fourth for married filing jointly. That's neither good nor bad. It is what it is. The point that we make is that we are concerned about too much. It is possible, we feel, to be too progressive in the sense that, you know, people can move. There's a reason why most economists believe that issues of pertaining to progressivity is best left to the federal government because it's a lot easier to move out of states than it is to move out of the country. We also believe that there are issues pertaining to tax pricing. As much as we don't like to say it, people should feel their taxes. It's the only way to calibrate the level of services and the quality and types of services we want as a society with the amount that we're willing to pay for them. Yes, ability to pay within the individual income tax is an important consideration, but it's possible to go too far on the other end, especially when you look at the potential fallout implications of what does the rest of the revenue system. You know, one of our biggest concerns is that for a lot of people, tax nirvana seems to be a really progressive income tax combined with a significantly lower reliance on property taxes, thereby transferring a lot of authority for local government finance back to the state. That's California. And I don't know if we want to head in the direction that they did. You know, they've made a lot of mistakes, and part of that has to do with their state-local finance relationship and their fiscal structure. I'm not laying this all on their very progressive income tax, but these things are all interconnected, and it's important to look at these things from a holistic perspective.
Representative?
Volatility, yes, is an issue, as Representative Benson mentioned, and will continue to be. I think the work of the Budget Trends Study Commission highlighted that, and we have been taking steps in that area, particularly in the property tax. But I think folks often don't realize that the most volatile tax in Minnesota isn't the income tax, it's the corporate tax. So if you're worried about volatility, you need to go look at the corporate tax. But the income tax volatility issue, as was stated, it's a trade-off. You know, you build in progressivity, and most people don't understand that the real progressivity for the average taxpayer that comes in the income tax is on the federal end. It's not on states. But Minnesota has a relatively more progressive tax system in the income tax to offset a lot of regressive taxes, because all the rest, other than the estate tax, everything else is regressive. But I think the ongoing problem really with the income tax is not volatility. And I agree with Mark, you can't get out past the margin. You don't want to be number one in anything. But I think the biggest issue is adequacy, honestly. The long-term trend for the state of Minnesota is we're all getting older, and folks, when they get older, they not only pay less taxes, they pay almost no income taxes. And so we've got this three-legged stool, and one of the legs of the stool is going to shrink real quick in a big way. And so we have an adequacy issue, setting aside if it's a flat income tax or a progressive income tax or a regressive income tax, doesn't matter. It's shrinking, and it's going to shrink fast. And we have a huge problem as we look at Minnesota grain. You know, how are we going to get, you know, I would challenge folks to stop thinking about how to lure different business incentives and try to lure people. I'll give you my family as an example. My daughter is a junior at Amherst College in Massachusetts. My son is a sophomore at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. My third child is right now over looking at a bunch of schools with her father and my fourth child. Now, they might come back here and work in some of our great Minnesota companies or start a company because they grew up here. You know, for all the folks that are kind of the best and brightest throughout the economy, you know, how are we going to get them to Minnesota if they didn't grow up here? It's a big problem for us. Big problem. Huge problem. And that's the income tax system there. And so if that shrinks fast, and it already is, we have huge issues that are beyond volatility or progressivity. So I think, you know, that's something the legislature needs to be starting to focus on. And, you know, I do think, you know, another way that people often don't think about how to deal with the income tax and its volatility and its progressivity versus regressivity is you don't have to just raise income taxes. You can cut regressive taxes. I mean, that makes the whole system more balanced too. Take away some of the bad stuff. Unfortunately, all of these things cost money. And so, you know, both parties could get around in the future when there's more money to say, well, if we can't raise a progressive tax, let's cut a regressive tax. And we've been trending the other way now for quite some time. The regressive taxes are going up.